Welcome to Sliding Doors Podcast. This is a podcast about empowering individuals within a scaling business to step into leadership with the confidence to deliver the exceptional. I'm Terri-Sue Cosgrove, and with me I have my co-host.
And I'm Sharon Dehmel.
And this is a podcast on what you need to know that you won't find in a management book or a search engine. Okay, hi Sharon.
Hi Terri-Sue.
Welcome back.
Delighted to be here again.
That's brilliant. And today we've got an interesting topic, which is DEI. So Sharon, what does DEI stand for?
Well, DEI actually stands for diversity, equity and inclusion.
Brilliant. And I understand this is all underneath the Employment Equality Act in Ireland. And it's very important that you do have DEI in your workplace. So maybe you might discuss with me, what actually is DEI and how does that work in the workplace?
Yeah, actually, I came across this really interesting explanation for diversity and equity and inclusion. And diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to share your playlist.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's very, because, how often do you go to a party and...
Yeah, you stand in a corner and
listening to somebody else's music and you may or may not like it. Or if you've somebody who walks in and goes over and changes the music and you're like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
That's not right. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
So it's a nice way of thinking of it. But also what we're talking about is, there's a lot of discussion at the moment in the newspapers around, diversity in terms of gender, in terms of male, female, but diversity is so much more complex than that. And you're talking about age, you're talking about race, ethnicities, abilities, disabilities, genders, religion, cultures, sexual orientations, so much. And it's actually sometimes quite overwhelming, I think, for small companies to be able to get their heads around this. They want to show up in the right way for all of their people. But they need guidelines.
Maybe, or even they're not even aware.
Yeah.
So we talked about this before about biases in the workplace. So this is an act, and people are protected under various different acts in the workplace. But let's dig down into the DEI. And so if you're a leader and you basically you haven't really maybe traveled internationally, this is your first management role, how would you approach DEI in the workplace?
So I have some statistics here that I think are great at putting things in context. So before I jump into that question, I'm just going to share something with you.
Brilliant.
That according to the census in 2022 in Ireland, 12% of the population is non-Irish.
Okay, wow.
And 313,000 are from the EU, 83,000 from the UK. And pre-2022, 10,000 people moved from India, 5 from Brazil, 3.9. The figures are crazy when you think of how diverse Ireland has become over the last couple of years. And that doesn't mention the travelling community, or getting into religion. So it is something that is our reality every day. Every time you walk across the street, you see people who are so different from, let's say, 20 years ago. So Ireland is a very different place than it was today, or than it was in the past, when, for example, when we were in school.
Yes.
So what does that mean then for leaders? And people, we talked about bias. People think, I treat everybody fairly. I don't have any biases. But we mentioned in the last podcast, I think we have about 240. But the thing about bias is that we all have them. Okay. And it's normal, if you've grown up in a particular part of the world and you've only seen people who look like you, it's our human, it's our biological brain stepping in and saying, oh, this person is different to me. I need to determine, are they a friend or foe?
Okay.
And, so when you think about how you're reacting to how somebody does something differently in your team, and they're from whatever that diversity lens is, very often, you have to stop and think and ask yourself, well, am I looking at this person as an individual and getting to know and trust them, by getting to know who they are, or am I putting them, categorize them, stereotyping them and saying, oh, they're from wherever, therefore they must be whatever.
And I think we're all guilty of that. So I've worked internationally for years in many different countries across the world. And it was a baptism of fire personally for myself, because I came with my Irish biases, what I had learned in school and
Yeah.
what I thought how everybody should behave or communicate. And so that can be very, very different. So let's break that down. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, it's interesting when you said there a little bit beforehand that it was exhausting. I'm actually going to get you to do something because we're here on video today. So I see you have a pen and paper there.
Yes, I do.
So what I'm going to ask you to do is write your name 5 times.
Okay.
So your first name and your surname. And then tell me how you feel when you're writing it.
Yeah, I'm just flying through it here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Done.
So you feel comfortable, you feel confident. What else do you feel?
Don't even have to think about it.
So put the pen in the other hand and write your name 5 times and tell me how you feel.
Oh God, this is hard. I'm slower. I'm much slower.
Yeah.
It's nearly, you can't even read it. I'm really uncomfortable. It's taken so much effort.
Yeah.
And I've only just wrote my first name now there. So if I do the 5 more times, like this is, I'm tired. I'm tired already. Okay, do I have to do this 5 times?
No,
Sharon?
you don't. It's okay.
I give up.
But you gave after 3, but if I made you do it for 5 times, you'd really feel it. And it's you mentioned a couple of words there that you felt tired. It's, it's effortful. You have to be very intentional and it looks awful. So you don't feel good about it. And I think it's a great exercise actually to do with your team when you have a diverse team, particularly if there's a dominant culture, so that they understand what it might be like for the people, the non-dominant, either whatever that diverse group is in the room. That's sometimes how they can feel. They feel awkward. They feel uncomfortable. They don't feel like themselves. And it's not a nice place to be. And it will trigger your stress response.
Yes.
And, because I think we mentioned this before, stepping into the shoes of others can be quite difficult. We think we know what they're going through, but we don't really. And this is a really simple exercise to give people that physical, visceral experience of what it's like to be uncertain, unsure, unfamiliar. And diversity very often brings those feelings, particularly, if you have somebody who's, whatever the diversity is, be it neurological, be it how they identify, whatever that is, it can cause us to feel uncomfortable because it's not our normal, what we're used to or we have very little experience of.
Okay.
And when we experience discomfort like that, what's your automatic response? You did it. You said, do I have to do this?
Yeah. Do I have to continue?
Do I have to continue?
Yes,
This is hard. I want to stop.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Okay.
We don't see it through because it is something that we have to get better at doing.
So are we talking about here the people that maybe have moved into Ireland and they are, let's say, in their first year in a role, like it's exhausting for them because not only have they to, work in a different language, once they finish work, they've got to, everything is new. They're constantly learning new routes to work. So that is exhausting for them.
Yeah.
So that's one thing about people moving into the Irish space. Diversity also covers a multitude of things. So also, another big one that's come up is he, she, they, and them.
Yeah.
And how people identify. So maybe we could...
So I think a lot of companies now ask people, and even when you see it in official documentation, you are actually being asked to choose your pronoun.
Pronouns, yes.
But a lot of that is at surface level. That's the paperwork. That's we have to do this because of the Act, and we have to do this because we want to attract talent, and in order to have great talent, it's very diverse. And if you want, particularly the younger people today are much more conscientious, and they want conscious leadership. They want people who are mindful and respectful of diversity, whatever that is.
Yes.
But putting it on a document doesn't mean that your organization has that mindset and approach. And leaders need help with that because sometimes, you might be, like you've had lots of experience of living in lots of different countries, but maybe you haven't had experience of dealing with somebody who's neurodiverse.
Yes.
And that brings that requires other mindsets and approaches. And if you don't empower our leaders and the people around them to understand that, and give them practical tools and solutions to be able to deal with that in the workplace, it can become challenging. It's interesting because retention is a huge thing. Churn is a massive cost for businesses.
Absolutely.
And I think I was reading something like that people who are physically disabled, the return rate among them when they feel like they belong, that they matter, that they psychological safety is so much lower, because it's, they don't always find a space where they feel completely accepted and can show up as their whole self.
Yes.
Regardless of what that whole self looks or sounds like. So, we are so quick, particularly our biases, we're so quick to
judge and just look at it through our own lens.
Like when you went abroad and you worked abroad, it's interesting that you don't realize, you probably looked in the mirror. I always think that when you go abroad and work within different cultures, that it's you, for the first time, you're looking at what you look like through their lens, because they start to make assumptions about who you are. Oh, you're Irish, therefore. Oh, you're, female, white, Irish, therefore.
Yes.
And, what if you're not? What if you're different? And
Yes.
why are you different? And what does that mean? So, if you remember, how did you feel when you were, you didn't fit in around here, or you were different, you stood out? How did that make you feel?
Yeah, I did think that I stood out. I really stood out when I first moved down to Elaine, because it was a border town, and obviously I was female, I dressed different, and I had blonde hair, and that was not the norm down there. Now, since then, there's been, thousands of Irish teachers and international teachers have gone down into these towns and these desert towns. So, more normal.
Mm-hmm.
But 15 years ago, when I moved down to the Middle East, I was not the norm that you see out walking. I used to go out walking in the evening, and
Mm-hmm.
People would beep at me and people would stare at me, and I couldn't understand it. It made me feel unsafe, actually.
Yeah.
And even though it's the safest country in the world.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, is that insight, that experience that you've had is invaluable, because you're much more mindful as a leader yourself when you've experienced that kind of being treated differently, be it positive or negative. And I think sharing those kind of experiences, like a lot of us have had experiences like that where you don't belong, you look different, whatever. As a leader, sharing that insight, making, both positive and negative, so that people say, oh, this is a conversation we can actually have in the workplace.
Yes, yes. And for myself, I managed a team down there and I worked in healthcare, and getting us to communicate together where we all could understand each other was a huge difficulty that I faced in that role, because, we were something like 60 different nationalities in that hospital.
But in terms of because DEI, there's two aspects to it. We said, it's what you do with the paperwork, the policy, the procedures you put in place, and how you show up as a leader to actually make that happen and create the right culture. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about, from the legal perspective, just high level on the DEI, what where they can look for information and what kind of things to look out for, or what is the act?
So in Ireland, we have the Employment Equality Act 1998 and 2004, and that sets out the 8 grounds. But so for young leaders, I think what we're really saying today is that, you can put in your policies, you can have HR to come in and do training and to put in your policies. And I think that's the first most important thing, is the understanding, of the law and the acts that are there to protect people and to build up these working environments. But then it's also the training and the development, and to remove those biases that people have.
Yeah.
We spoke about the 240 different biases that we have. And so we're seeing now in the workplace, people are, you don't legally have to make a disclosure if you have some sort of disability, let's say in the workplace, let's say if you're not neurotypical in the workplace. But we are seeing we need to train up our managers so that they can understand how their team, empowering everybody that is not turning up as a bog standard atypical person with all their, maybe you have non-binary members of your teams. You may have someone that has some sort of illness or disability, or someone that's coming in and not neurodiverse, and that how can you get these people to work together and make everybody feel safe, seen, and able to deliver their best work. So maybe you do this leadership training for teams. So this is our future. This is our working
absolutely
teams and our environment. So how do we deliver that?
I think there's four pillars when it comes to changing behavior and mindset. The first one is motivation. We have to actually want this to happen. Now, a lot of that is driven by our own social justice and, how we think, but also now we have regulations and laws in place. So It's great that you think this way, but also you're legally, obliged to, and that's a massive piece. So motivation, knowledge, and then the third one is strategy, and the final one are actions. And because it's all very well to say, oh yeah, we're a diverse workplace. So what does that really mean? How am I going to feel when you do come into my party and put on your own playlist? I'm going to feel offended probably, or like, what's going on here? So we need to help the leaders to understand how it can show up, these biases, when we make decisions. If somebody makes a suggestion at a meeting and we're not listening to them. It was really interesting. Barilla, which is a big pasta brand, global brand, one of their senior leaders made a comment about homosexuality. I think it was around advertising, and you'd never see somebody like that in our ads. Caused a huge amount of brand damage for them.
Oh my God!
They had to do then a really big campaign to bring that back, because they realized it's not just like that was a bias that they had, and when your senior leadership is voicing that, and then on your HR policy procedures, then but they actually completely turned it around and really engaged with the DEI in their organization, because they realized what we were saying in the handbook was not actually happening in reality. Like Harvard, I think, pulled their pasta brand from their canteen. At the time it was a big scandal, but they turned it around and they totally embraced it and realized that we need to, as an organization, embed this into our culture. That DEI is not just something that we pay homage to, that we pay lip service to. Sorry. So, companies need to be able to go deep, wide, internal, inside out approach. They really do need to. It's not just saying, oh yeah, you have to be tolerant at meetings when people are talking from different, whatever the diversity is in your organization. It's so much more than that. Organizations, that leaders, if it matters, measure it.
Yes, because you can't manage it if you can't measure it.
No.
Yeah.
But the other interesting aspect of that is in other countries, then you can't measure it because it's actually illegal to collect certain data around race or ethnicity or whatever because of historical reasons. So it's how do we navigate that space with our leaders? A big piece then is the strategy. Like, how are we going to actually? Because when you have a leadership team who talk about it, and believe and value diversity, truly value diversity. So Barilla brought together a group of diverse people to look at. Barilla is an Italian pasta brand.
Okay, yes.
To look at, simple things like, if you have any kind of visual impairment, buying pasta in a package, in a box, is really difficult. You have no idea what you're buying.
Okay.
Because it's, except for, the long pastas like spaghetti or linguine, you have no idea what it is, the packaging. So they actually brought in people who were diverse to help them to create new packaging that made it more accessible, and that for customers who are diverse in whatever could actually buy their products. They did a lovely on their packaging for the spaghetti. They had two women with a piece of spaghetti wrapped around their arms, their hands, showing the connection between them. So they turned what was, because I guess the lesson is that even the big global players can make mistakes.
Okay.
It's okay to make a mistake when it comes to DEI, but what are you going to do about it? How are you as an organization? Because even with the best practice in place.
Yes, we saw that recently, didn't we, with the Italian captain of the team, or not the captain of the team, but the manager, the Spanish, and he the way he kissed an individual a member of his team was deemed globally so inappropriate.
Yeah. So
and he didn't back down from that.
Exactly. So that can end up very serious in a court situation.
Yes.
If people take it to them.
Damage it does.
Yeah.
Yes. So wrapping it up, this podcast, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge. Wrapping it up, what would be 3 quick, wins that you would give to an organization or a leader that is, they're scaling up, and how to look at their DEI?
I think you have to, I said to you, you go deep, as in you go look at your organization. Actually, who are the diverse people in your community, and what are their needs? Engage with them, talk to them. Don't make assumptions. You don't know what they need, and what inclusion means for them.
Okay.
So engage. I always think we always think we have to have all these answers ourselves, but we don't. Ask people what works for them and leave it open that if it's not working, let's change it and let's make it better.
Okay, so you would go push it out to your employees and say, how can we make you be more seen in our organization? How can we support you to be your true authentic self coming into work on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in terms of leadership, leaders change to lead change.
Okay.
So we as leaders, it doesn't matter if you're in the C-suite or, the team lead, we need to help our leaders because we, as you said, we all have biases, we don't even know it. So it's
absolutely. I have a million of them.
Well, you exceeded this. But it's so, it's helping them and having those conversations. And because when you raise it with somebody, they go, oh my God, I didn't even realize that.
Yes.
And instead of feeling shame and embarrassment, say, okay, now that we know that, how can we help you with this? And, and taking that proactive approach. Make it local because obviously diversity, I think there's so many countries still where, homosexuality is like against the law or even under, threat
it's
of
shocking
that.
in itself, isn't it? Yeah. But here we are.
Yeah. So, you can't, if you are a global company, you can't just impose your values from your home country on them. You have to respect the local law, do as the Romans do or take a diplomatic approach. You look for local allies and local change agents, but you have to also respect the local culture. And you know that from working in the Middle East.
Absolutely. And you know what I noticed as well, and we see this now in Ireland, but sometimes we see countries in conflict with other countries, and you may, for example, have Ukrainians and Russians on your team, or now you might have Palestinians and you might have Israelis on your team, and how you would manage that. And that comes underneath diversity and inclusion as well in the workplace.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to organizations from the practical policy procedures?
Is, you're not just as you said, just to, support that you're not an expert. You have to sometimes go out and get outside help with this. So, you don't know what you don't know is what I would say. So I would say lean out to the experts who are the experts in DEI, who can come in and deliver that training for you. And I know it's hard if you're a small company, but I think it's very important to get help and get leadership because that'll be the best money that you can spend because we know the cost of conflict in the workplace. It can be extraordinary. That costs an awful lot more to sort out in the time. So you're better to get ahead of these things. So get in your policies, follow your policies, make sure that your leaders are well trained in it and are leading by example, top down all the way. So that would be my 2 pence worth on that. Okay, so we're going to wrap that up today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Sharon, as always, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
And Terri-Sue, also for me, talking to you.
Thanks very much again for joining us in Sliding Doors. This podcast is a practical approach for real life scenarios that you won't learn in management handbooks or on a search engine. As always, our details are below if you'd like to reach out. Thank you.